Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Celine. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, so tonight we've got a slight problem. There's going to be no lyrics on the board because the computer has decided to crash on us. Yeah. Just shows how good the devil's trying to work in this, hey?
Amen.
But it's not going to stop us from singing. That's it.
Yes.
And as you can see, we've got no drummer and we've got no bass. They're taking a bit of a break tonight.
Okay.
But it's still not going to stop us from singing. So could I get you all to stand up, please? Our first song we're going to sing is My Redeemer Lives.
My
think I heard everyone sing.
Amen.
Which is so good. You all have really good voices.
Oh, stop it.
Okay, so our next song is There's No One Like Jesus.
I know my audience ain't dead tonight. Can I get a hey-ya? Hey-ya! Halfway through the week of the revival, and y'all already sound revived. Anyway, so I'll back to you.
Is that a word?
Yes?
Okay, sorry. Alright, y'all, who is blessed to be here on day 4 for revival. Man, you sound dead. Thank you. Thanks, wifey. Thank you. Alright, who is blessed to be here on day 4 for work revival, guys?
Alright, hear it.
Are you glad to be here?
Yeah, I can feel the
Yeah,
blessing.
me too. Let's just talk to each other and forget about them for a bit.
No, that's okay.
Alright, y'all, I just want to welcome you guys here and thanks for joining us. The numbers getting bigger and bigger, and the songs are sounding better because there's more people singing and with passion. Let's keep that up, guys, for the rest of the night. Anything else to say?
I don't know, I think that was the welcome, right? So we move on to the icebreaker. You know what time it is, it's prime time. So, how many of you enjoy jokes? A small number of you, thank you for being honest. Now, so, instead of asking for volunteers, because so many of you jump up at once, I'm going to nominate some volunteers. So, if your name happens to be Calvin and you're wearing a red shirt and you're sitting in the corner,
and our next volunteer is a guy named with a bunch ponytail. And barefooted boy in church shoes.
Time is hard right now. Okay, well, I know these two young gentlemen myself, but however you guys do not. So, seeing as we ran out of names because we called them out, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, young Pravin?
I am an educator at the Early Learning Center over there.
He's 21 and single, no jokes. And over here, my man with the microphone already. Introduce yourself.
Kelvin, 23, passionate about sports. Yeah.
You single?
That doesn't matter.
Yeah, he is.
Well, the surprise for tonight is young Pravin and Kelvin will be facing off, giving us their best poker face. I don't know what poker is, but... So, basically, these two will be telling each other jokes, and the first one to laugh. Oh yeah, so the first one to laugh will lose. Now, gentlemen, do you have some jokes off the top of your head? Because if not, do not fret, we have some prepared for you. I have some prepared for you, Celine helped somewhat, but yes. So, are you ready, boys? Stand together, facing each other. Alright. First we'll throw some rock, paper, scissors to see who goes first, so you know how it goes. Scissors, paper, rock. We'll go on 3. 1.
So on number 3 or after?
1, 2, 3.
Man, you cheat.
Alright. Well,
the first joke is your face.
we're here to tell jokes, not Rachel Jones. That was the focus round. That's true.
What goes up, it never comes down. Your nose.
Koreans kept a very strong facial composure. I appreciate that. So you guys both keep roasting each other. I'm just going to have you guys pull out jokes from the hat. Alright, so now Pravin, your turn.
Come on, give it to me. You got this. You're your host. Come on. You got this.
A blind man walks into a bar and a table and a chair. Who writes it?
Yeah, well done, Calvin.
Good job, Calvin.
Wait, hold on.
My dog used to chase people when they bike a lot. It got so bad, I had to take his bike away. What happens next? Your mind blows up.
Okay, Calvin, before you make him laugh, I'm just going to stop you right there. Go ahead.
That's my part now.
Round 2, we're doing good so far after the practice.
Alright, I got it.
Why did the old man fall in the well?
Because he couldn't see that well.
I got it though.
No, he didn't.
It was close, he was close. 10 points for being close.
And for trying.
Did we get like free stuff?
Yeah, don't worry, you get prizes at the
You
end.
get a high five.
The other day, my wife asked me to pass her lipstick, but I accidentally passed the glue stick. She still isn't talking to me. Why?
I don't know.
The joke wasn't funny.
Good delivery.
I'm
Would the audience like one more round?
Yes.
Amen.
Thank you, Rafi.
Thanks, Rafi.
Alright, one more just for kicks.
Wait, can we go from the top of their heads?
Oh, yeah, go from the top of your head. Don't make it hard. What do you mean to just make one of
Just
them?
come up with your own.
Oh, come up with your own. But the face will be so like that.
You cannot look at yours and then make you laugh about it.
You can't do it.
Anyways, a girl said to me, let's exchange numbers. I said, won't that confuse people who are trying to call us?
Okay.
Try, man.
And the Lord said unto John, come forth, and you will receive eternal life. John came fifth and won a toaster.
Thank you. Good job.
I'm gonna have to put an end to it right there, but congratulations to the two of you who participated tonight, even though I just called you out. So, you win 3 hats. Well, tomorrow night, come back for more action. Other than that, that's done.
Good job. Alright. Now that we're done with the jokes, let's get all serious and let's start with the word of prayer.
Alright, bow your heads and close your eyes. Dear Jesus, just want to thank you once again for being able to have this opportunity to be able to speak to you, Lord. And not many people have it as fortunate as us to be able to get together and just learn and just listen to our pastor speak and just knowing more about you, Jesus. And I pray that as well, the night goes on, more people will come in to hear your word, Lord, and that we will continue to be blessed by this week of revival. Amen.
Amen. Alright, you guys give it up for the worship team. I mean, Steve.
Yeah, I'm definitely not singing. Alright, so please excuse me, I have caught the case of the man flu. It's a real thing. Don't believe whatever people say. It's true. Men suffer more. I found that out through Ravi's dad.
Huh?
Men feel pain more. So like a girl's level 2 is like a man's level 10. So his dad's a surgeon. He knows. Right. Okay, so my testimony is actually just from a few nights ago, Monday night after we left here, and I went home, and I'm a bit of a old soul. I like to go to bed early. 9:30 is pushing it. 10 o'clock is ridiculous.
2 a.m.
And anyway, my neighbour, I live on top of a little industrial estate, and there's a guy downstairs who has a lawn mowing business and stuff, and he lives that's not important anyway. And anyway, he's sitting out front of his house with another guy who lives in the area as well, and they're sitting down drinking and talking and stuff. And where they're sitting down is just at the end of my car park. So, I pull up and I go out and just start having a little bit of a chat to them and stuff like that. And I asked about another guy in the complex because there was some police officers there a few weeks before. And it turns out the guy had died. So I was like, what's happened? Was it natural causes or self-inflicted or whatever? Anyway, we started talking about that, and obviously one of the guys he got a bit upset because he was friends with him. They used to sit and drink and talk and stuff like that, and he was a bit upset. And so we were just it just went from went from a question to chatting for ages, and we ended up speaking together, and he was asking my opinion on different things, and they both know that I go to church and stuff like that. And anyway, we started talking and started getting into a really deep conversation. We started talking about what happened over in New Zealand and what my thoughts were, and I got to say that though I didn't really agree with what particular people like believe or whatever, it's like it doesn't take away from their inherent worth as a human being, right? And so, and they could it was really cool. It started becoming like quite a spiritual sort of conversation about that, and got to talk about how you need to forgive yourself for not being perfect because of some other things that had happened the week before, and he was feeling a bit guilty towards himself and stuff. And so I got to sort of share with him and tell him, and we ended up talking, and he ended up saying all this like really cool stuff. My neighbor as well, he said like he really enjoys having us there, having me there, and he really loves Saturdays when the youth group come over to my house and like hang out and stuff. They think that everyone's super lovely, just the way that they act. And they said Celine has like the most lovely smile, and she's always so nice to them.
Aww, stop it.
And how like everyone's just like helping one another out and stuff. And so we've had a few conversations and a few talks about God and everything, and this conversation went all the way to midnight, and I probably don't want to explain all of it. I don't even want to explain all of it at all, because we don't have till midnight, obviously. And I just, the part that I got out of it that was really cool is, the night before I'd really like decided to just, I really loved what Pastor said about just like where you are. Right, because I don't know about you, but I seem to sometimes think I get a bit further ahead in my journey, and then when you stumble and fall, you get angry at yourself because you're not where you wish you were. Right? And so it was a big like just where I am, and I said, God, you've got to do stuff. You've got to do stuff. As he was saying last night, it's all like put it back on him. You just have to give up. And Praveen, can you bring my phone? Anyway, and I got to talk to this guy about God and tell him the story of Jesus a bit, and like, he was asking me. I was wearing my Yahweh shirt, and he's like, "What does that say?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's the name of God in Hebrew." And he's like, "That's so cool." And he asked me why in like one of his shows it's like Jesus called Jesus, but the top subtitles come up Jesus and stuff. And I got to sort of explain that, and explain that Christians, what people preach or what people tend to say, because one of their mums was a so-called Christian who he was fostered through, and she used to say, "Praise the Lord, hallelujah," because they didn't know, they weren't quite sure what the hallelujah word was. I was trying to explain it to them, but they didn't quite get it because I was a little bit drunk. It was funny, he's like, "No, it's hallelujah," and the other guy's like, "Hallelujah," and I'm like, "No, it's hallelujah," and he's like, "Hallelujah, you've got it." And I got to tell him. I remember saying something. I said, "No, what Jesus said about people," because she would say hallelujah, praise the Lord, all this sort of stuff. And then he said they would hop in the car, and she would call him a little C, and that he was from the devil, and abuse him, and like all the way from 10 to 17, and I just got to say to him, I said, "Look, you know what Jesus said about those people? He said they're like whitewashed tombs. They're pretty on the outside, but they're dead bones on the inside." And I said, those people don't represent God. God is about a relationship. It's not about going to church or whatever else. And something that just really stood out to me that he kept saying was that like he noticed the people who were coming around, and how I had helped him out in the past, and how Celine and all everyone else who was coming around, they were just polite to him, and they said that they noticed something different. And I thought that was really cool, and it sort of and I decided to share it because of what GD said, how the girl was like, "Are you a Jesus?" Anyway, and so I shared with them, and I went to bed about midnight. And then, as I do, I sort of check the Bible verse of the day. Shout out to the Bible app. And it said, "Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God." And I thought that was beautiful, because the prayer I had prayed the night before that was that my life would be, I'd be able to say what God said about Enoch, right? Pretty much all you hear about Enoch is he walked with God and he pleased God. And I feel like that was something that was really, like I prayed about that the night before, and then that popped up on my phone, and I don't think that was a coincidence. Anyway, next.
Thank you, John.
Would you all please be upstanding as we sing this song before
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Is everyone good?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So everyone had a good day?
No.
Yeah? No? Oh, but that's good. Good days are not good days are not good days are good days too. Why wasn't it good?
Too much stress.
Too much stress, eh? Too much stress is good. Did you figure out your resiliency levels now?
Still working on it.
All right then, well, work on it. That's why we have stress, so that we can figure out how resilient we are or not, and then we can bounce back again. If at first you don't succeed, try again. And if you don't succeed, give up, try something else. You know what I mean? Don't overstretch it. Don't overstretch it and overstress it. I am in the midst of a new season for myself. A new season in which what I came to do in this country 6 years ago, but what the Lord told me I would be doing in this country 6 years ago, I'm now doing. And my life is, I am called to ministry. This is my 20th year of ministry. 18 years of my call of ministry has been pastoral ministry. For any of you who are called to ministry, this is how it works. The call to ministry is not necessarily called the call to pastor a church. The call to ministry is to give your life to God so that He can use it how He wants. That's what the call of ministry is. Giving your life to God so that God can use it. So my life is given over for God to use it. That fits in with the Old Testament idea of separating and sanctifying something. You separate it. So my life is separated to ministry. And so 18 of those years have been pastoral ministry. And pastoral ministry for me has been pastoral ministry in the church, but then also working in schools, working in prisons, working in pupil referral units, working across culture. I've spent more time outside of the church than I've spent inside of the church, because that has been all a part of my pastoral ministry. When I moved here 6 years ago, the Lord told me that in this season, you're going to be writing. But it's taken me 6 years to get to the writing. But in the meantime, you're still going to be doing ministry. And the ministry was pastoral ministry. But now I've entered my writing season. And everything that I've learned over the past 20 years of ministry, and everything that I've gathered over the past 53 years of life, because I'm 53, I'm 54 in April, I'm now beginning to write down. Once you turn 40, you begin to be very reflective, because 40 is your decade of authority. I don't need your opinion about what I'm saying. I know what I'm saying. In the 20s, you're like, what did you think about what I said? In your 30s, like, really? I'm the youngest of 10 children, 9 living. I'm the 8 living. 8 living. Keep forgetting I lost my brother. I don't know if that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I don't know if it's a good thing. I digress. And I didn't have an opinion that was even valid in my family until I turned 40. Now, bear in mind, before then, I was big Pastor Eddie Hippolyte, traveling all around the world, ordained minister of the gospel. All of them, all the trappings in my family is like, sit down. Ain't no one listening to you. I know. That's why I never used to bring Christian people around my family. Because I'm in the church, I'm big bad Pastor Eddie Hippolyte. You know what I mean? And they bring me around my family. Some of you are laughing because that's the same thing you're going through in your family, which is good, man. We can talk about it afterwards. We can share our struggles afterwards. I still remember the day my eldest brother is 10 years older than me. As kids, we used to just worship him. I still remember the day my eldest brother called me and asked me for advice. Now, my natural inclination was to do what we always do. So, did you speak to mommy? What did mommy say? Just call Mummy, man. Mummy will know how to work that too. The only way I could deal with him was to disassociate him from being my brother and deal with him professionally as a pastor. Because he was asking me something that I dealt with in ministry all the time. You know, you pastor churches, and I had to work through it with him. And he was like, at the end of it, he was like, no, hey, listen, thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I still reverted back to, but did you ask Mummy? What did Mummy say? What did Mummy say? So in this season, I find myself using all of the things that I've learned and placing it in a place where I share story, I share learning, and I share journey. Because I believe that what we have an obligation to do as individuals is when we discover how we grow in a certain situation, when we discover how we made it in a certain situation, when we discover how we're better because of a certain situation, we have an obligation to share that. And that is at any age. That doesn't actually come with, that. It's not always about the wisdom that comes with time. Sometimes it's just the experience and the learning that comes with just being able to deal with this, just being able to overcome this, just being able to navigate a way out of it. So you can be 10. How did you do that? Well, what happened was da. Oh. So how did you feel about it? Well, at the time I thought it was hard, but then the more I kept with it, I thought like, yeah, I'm going to get better. And then you at 25 are thinking, actually I could learn from this 10-year-old. All right, then. I figure out. So how did you do it again? Tell me. Then you go away and learn. Don't just say, well, you're a 10-year-old, you ain't got nothing to teach me. I'm a big grown man with grey beard. No. You got something to teach me. Tell me how you did that again. Okay. And then you can go away and act like you did it. You don't have to tell the 10-year-old that you did it. You know? Claim it for yourself. Why am I sharing all of this? Because that's how the Bible is based. I told you from Monday and I'll tell you again, the reason why the Bible is so dysfunctional in the stories that it holds is because it's our story. The Bible is telling the human story. The human story is a messy story, it's a dysfunctional story. It's not a good story, it's an ugly story. But it's the story of a God who stays in the midst of the mess, the dysfunction, and the ugliness. It's a story of a God who comes looking for us in the midst of our dysfunction and our ugliness. Came in a garden asking, where are you? Came in a garden asking, where are you? He showed in Jeremiah 18, just in the analogy, that we're like clay on a potter's wheel, and sometimes life and grace and providence is forming us into something really beautiful, and all of a sudden life crashes all around us. Why? Because there's something in us. It's almost like a switch that we sometimes switch on in us, and we just destroy everything around us. We're doing so good, and then this switches on, and all of a sudden we just fail to believe that we can, or we just, there's something in us that just continues to listen to all the negativity that comes around us, and we've been doing so good. I don't know what it is, but Jeremiah 18 described it as a stone, and he said that the potter had two choices. He could either scoop up the whole piece of clay, throw it out, and start with a new piece of clay, or he could break the clay or plate the clay. That's what happens when you don't have water. Break the clay. Yeah, I said it that side. You could break the clay all the way back down to a lump, take the stone out, and then start again. What does it look like when Jesus turned up? When Jesus turned up, what did it look like? I love the Jesus stories, because Jesus is so us. Jesus is so us, a first century Palestinian, meat-eating, fish-eating Jew. I know some of you want to make Jesus a vegan. Don't make Jesus a vegan. I know you want to put veggie steaks in his mouth. Don't put veggie steaks in Jesus' mouth. He was a first century Palestinian Jew. That's what he was. That's all he was. And then he was so much more. And he's so us, and so unlike us. You see, in the ancient world, this is what they believed. They believed that spirit was spirit and flesh was flesh. Spirit could never come down into flesh and remain spirit. Flesh, forget that. This could never be that. But that could never come down here and remain what it was. But those Hebrews over in Palestine was preaching about a man who came from there down here and was fully here and fully there. He looked so much like us, they called him the Son of Man. He was so unlike us, they called him the Son of God. They said that this one came and he grew up in the worst of areas and in the most difficult of places. What on earth was that? Well, it was not, no. Looking so much like us, sounding so much like us. Oh no, I didn't say that so that you could bring me water, but seeing as the water's here. Oh gosh. Water to my right, the word to my left.
Amen.
I'm ready. Let's preach. And I'm not getting this one, no, I'm not getting that one tonight. I'm not busy for Jesus tonight. I'm just going to preach that good. What did it look like? Do you know the reason why I love Jesus? Because he will not take no for an answer. In terms of the separation that is caused by sin. The separation that caused, because that's what sin is. It's a separator. The phenomenon of sin is a separator. It's a disruptor. It disrupts relationships. It disrupts communication. It disrupts the way we see each other. It disrupted in the beginning the way they saw God. So they feared and they hid and they tried to fix their problems by themselves because they were self-preservationists. And then when God came around and asked what happened, then they became self-preservationists, not only with God, but with each other. Oh, this woman. Oh, this man. Oh, this serpent. Oh, this. It's not me. It's this. It's this. It's this. And yet God finds a way to cover them and to journey with them. And all through the Old Testament, he sends prophet after prophet. Message after message, and prophet after prophet, and prophecy after prophecy. All of them about the one who would come in their time in order to bring the answer to the problem. And then here comes Jesus. He will not take no for an answer. I love the idea that we come from the mind of God. We come from the mind of God. The intentionality. He creates the planet, and then he creates the whole planet for the purpose of saying, okay, all right, we ready? Okay, let's make humanity. That's why he creates the whole planet. So that it's like their crib. It's like their nursery. Create a whole planet and say, all right, let's make humanity. He makes humanity from the dust. Makes a man from the dust, breathes into that inanimate clay. His breath, it becomes a living being, a living soul. He takes a rib from that man who has come from the dust, and then he builds a woman and breathes into her. And they look at each other, flush in the face. Nothing separates them. But then the disruptor of sin, this phenomenon of sin comes in, changes the way they are as human beings, changes the way they relate as human beings. And so now God has to speak to them through prophets, and he has to speak to them through images, and he has to speak to them through imagery. But God will not take no for the answer. Even when time says, you've run out of credit. Because even God can only send so many messages by text. You can only send so many prophecies by text. You know what I mean? In the end, you just run out of credit. So heaven has to come up with a new plan. And what's the new plan? Jesus, God, the Father, the Spirit, they take him and they turn him into a seed. Place him in the womb of a woman. And then he comes, kicking and screaming and bloody into the world like us. I know we look at those, those Jesus stories, and Martha, Mary's having a baby. While Jesus is being born, just one sweat. No, she's a young girl. She's screaming for dear life. He comes kicking and bleeding and bloodied into the world like all of us. We come from the mind of him, he comes from the womb of us. It's beautiful. Because he will not take no for an answer. Because love doesn't take no for an answer. It's interesting. People ask, how long do we love somebody? Well, you love them until they actually walk away from your love. Because they actually will. People will put themselves in a place where they're like, no, I can't deal with your love no more. I just can't deal with your love. That's what you see with Judas, and that's what you see with Peter. Peter put himself in a place where he realized, I've got to respond to this, otherwise I'm going to die. Judas put himself in a place where I can't respond to this, and he died. Because you're never neutral. And so what does it look like when Jesus turns up into the human story? When Jesus turns up into the human story, Jesus once again is finding us where we find ourselves in our places of separation and dysfunction. Enter Mark. Enter Levi in Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2, turn or slide. And it's the story of the calling of Levi the tax collector. We're not going to spend a long time with it. Who is Levi? Levi is a tax collector. What is a tax collector? Well, a tax collector is a person who collected illegal money on behalf of the Roman state. The Romans would conquer you and then would pay you, and you would pay them for not killing you. Romans were gangster. They were just the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But the Roman peace was established by the sword. And so the Jews hated the Romans. And they hated the fact that they had to give the Romans money, as it were, protection money. Protection money. And then they hated the people that collected the tax on behalf of the Romans. Why? Because no one knew actually what the tax was. If the tax was 50 denarii that they had to give to the Romans, the tax collectors would tell everybody the tax is 100 denarii. If the tax was 5 denarii, the tax collectors would say the tax is 50 denarii. Give Rome their 5 denarii and then keep 45 denarii. That's why historically, tax collectors, by today's equivalent, were millionaires. Just millionaires. And look at Levi. Levi sits at that table, a Jew, outcast from his culture, outcast from his society, at a table of his own making, collecting money on behalf of Rome. Then the story says on this day, Jesus walks to where he is. I sometimes picture him sitting at the table, he sees the shadow come up, and he doesn't even look up. He says, 5 denarii. 5 denarii. Jesus says 2 words. Follow me. Follow me. The story says that he got up immediately and followed. Now we'll read the story without actually understanding the context of how beautiful and how actually fundamentally life transforming that was. Because not only does Levi have no space in his social context, his family doesn't have space in that social context. He can't go to synagogue. He can't go to the synagogue. He can't take part in national holidays, because when people see him, they spit in his face. He can't live where the everyday normal people within his Jewish culture live. He has to live with the people with whom he works. He has to live amongst publicans, tax collectors, sinners, outcast. That's where he lives. And so the fact that Jesus would go up to his table and said, follow me, said a number of things. Number one, it says, I see you. It says, I see you. Two, it says, you have value. Three, it says, where you sit, you don't have to sit. I'm not giving you an option, I'm giving you an alternative to where you sit. Because Jesus wasn't giving him an option, Jesus was giving him an alternative. And an alternative is a different choice altogether. An option is a different choice of the same thing. But Jesus was giving him an alternative to where he was by simply saying, follow me. Think about the people that you know that sit at tables of their own doing, tables of their own making, tables of their own making. I know, I live amongst, and I have friends who sit at tables of their own making. Friends who sit at their table of just relational dysfunction, parental dysfunction of their own making, drug dependency of their own making, alcohol dependency of their own making, criminal pasts and presents of their own making. They sit there within relational dysfunction, abusive relationships of their own making. Some of them hoping that nobody notices them. Some of them wishing that somebody would notice them. Think about all the people that are around you that sit at tables of their own making, wishing that somebody would come up to them, notice them, and speak with a love that notices them and just say, follow me. Come out of there, man. Come, I'm here with you. Come out of there. You don't have to sit there. Come out of there. You ain't born to sit there. Come out of there. I would go back into prisons. Once I became a Christian, because I spent so much time in them, in my 20s and in my teenage years. And I would say, this life of crime, drugs, and violence is not a life that you're sentenced to. It's just a lifestyle you're trapped in. It's not a life you're sentenced to. It's just a lifestyle you're trapped in. You can come out though. See, that's the beauty of this story here. And that's the beauty of this gospel story. And that's the beauty of what God calls us to. Because Levi wasn't going to be found until Jesus went and found him. Because he didn't know how to leave his table. People ain't going to be found until we find them. People ain't going to know that they're seen until we go to the places where they are and let them know you're seen. Come out. The gospel is a gospel that places itself in the spaces where people sit in isolation. I grew up under the culture. I'm from the Caribbean. My family is from the Caribbean. I'm from London. But I grew up in a Caribbean church. No! No! You can't go over there. No! Then people will corrupt you. Then people will make you turn away. Translated, those people will corrupt you. Those people will make you walk away from the faith. You can't go over there. But if we don't go over there, how are they going to get over here? If we don't go over there. Because they're too ashamed to come here. They don't know how they're going to be treated if they come here. They don't know if they're going to be welcomed if they come here. But when Jesus goes to where he sits, he knows he's welcome wherever this man is. Jesus knows when he goes to where he sits, where she sits, she knows, oh, okay. So that's why he gets up immediately. That's why he gets up immediately. Because people sit in the midst of their addictions and their struggles and their pain, wishing that somebody would come with enough love, enough grace, and enough foresight to just say, follow me. Follow me out of this. Follow me out of this. I'm with you. So he gets up and he follows Jesus. Let me say something that we learn from this. Number one, lives empower lives. Lives empower lives. People aren't empowered by information. They're empowered by lives. People don't really care about what you got to say. They want to know what you got to do. That's what they want to know. Number two, consistent and persistent love is impossible to ignore. You can't be neutral about love. You're either going to go, oh, or you're going to, but you ain't going to stand in one space. You are going to respond to it. You're either going to walk to it or you're going to walk from it. Because persistent and consistent love is impossible to ignore. And number three, and most importantly, and you've got to remember this, because it's important for how we live our lives as Christians. Jesus associates with outcasts. And I'm going to say it again. Jesus associates with outcasts. So what does Levi do? Levi does what we all do. And what we all would do when things are good. He holds a party. How many of you love parties? Raise your hand. Okay, all right. How many of you love gatherings where people are really happy, there's great food, and everyone's together in one space? That's a party. Yeah, let me help you. That's a party. Oh no, I don't like parties. Oh, one of them? Yeah, that's a party. Yeah, we all like parties. You know? I love Christians, man. We are so good. We are so good, man. We are so good. We are so good. He holds a party. And what does Levi do? Levi invites everybody he used to hang out with to his house, and in the house he invites Jesus. Jesus was a party attender and a party goer, but Jesus wasn't a raver. You know the difference, didn't you? A party goer will go to a party attender will go to a party they're invited to. A raver sits at home, pulls out their phone, and looks for parties. Now, Jesus wasn't a raver, but if you was having a party and said, Jesus, we come to my party, you're like, yeah, what do you need me to bring? Water? Wine? I can bring just water. I go. Works every time, you'd love it. Jesus went where people invited him because Jesus was intentional about being in that space. And they were intentional about having Jesus in that space. And Jesus always honored anybody who said, Lord, would you come to where I am? You see, it's one thing where Jesus goes up to somebody and says, where are you? But he loves it when people come up to him and say, Jesus, I'm here. Would you come to where I am? Jesus is like, yeah. What? Of course. Come down, man. What are you hiding for? I know you're small, but I was coming to your house anyway. You come down, man. Yeah. Anyway, you good? Yeah. I know. Come on, let's go. Jesus went looking for humanity. You've seen that. He showed you that in Genesis 1. Jesus goes looking for humanity, so he holds this party. He holds this party because the power of a changed life, consistent love, and unashamed acceptance of the poor and outcasts all play out in Levi's actions. So Jesus holds a party and people complain. You know what always cracks me up about the people who complained about the people that Jesus hung out with? They was always there. Not her, but they was always there. You know what I mean? They always stayed far enough to see what was happening and complain about what was happening, but never came close enough to make a difference to what was happening. I'm like, that's almost like a sick spiritual fetish. No, I'm not going near them, but I'm gonna stay here. No, I don't dance. This is just a body reaction, I don't know. I'm not dancing. Oh, look at that, look at that. Oh. They sit at Jesus' table, the Pharisees complain, and Jesus makes it clear. Listen, the sick, those who are well don't need a doctor. So I never came to be with the well. I came to be with the sick. Which is beautiful. Let me share 4 things with you about being a table for Jesus. Because that's all Levi did. He provided a table for Jesus, invited his friends to that table, and then invited Jesus to sit there. Because when you've got something good, you want to share it with somebody else. Number 1, a table for Jesus. If you want to be a table for Jesus, and open a table for Jesus, and a table for Jesus is just a space. That's all it is, just a space. It could be a space in your home, it could be a space on your team, it could be a space around a coffee table, it could be a space on the beach, it could be a space where you regularly meet. And as a group of friends, you are just in each other's company, just like they see at your house. And they notice from a distance. Same thing happened one night. We used to run this thing called Food for the Brain. Food for the Brain. And Food for the Brain was just a gathering of young people. Young people every week. We gathered every Tuesday for 7 years. The amount of people that I baptized out of that front room on one of the roughest housing estates in South London, Somerleyton Estate. And one night, everyone was going, you know, bye, yeah, no, da, da, da. And one of the guys was standing up with Anna. Anna was the person whose house everybody met in. She was a foster mother. And he was watching, he was a youth worker in the area. He was just watching them say goodbye. And he said to Anna, Anna, what's going on here? I see these guys here every week. And then I told him, oh, it's Food for the Brain, and da, da. And he was just watching the way these guys, these girls, they were just all just interacting and saying goodbye. And he said, boy, there's enough love amongst them, innit? She said, yeah, man, there's enough love amongst them. But it was Jesus who was in the midst of them. It's Jesus who is in the midst of them. Number 1, a table for Jesus is never filled with the obvious. I know we always want people, well, what do they believe? I've never figured out how you can agree on a text, and I don't agree with the text, and because you don't agree with the text, that I agree with it, and I don't agree with it the way you agree with it, we can't talk. How is that possible? No, I mean seriously, how is that possible? Because we still eat, we still love sport, we still have to do everything outside of the text. Outside of the text, we are still human beings. So I only want obvious people sitting at my table. I want the people who look like me and eat like me and smell like me. I want the people who believe like me. A table for Jesus is never filled with the obvious. It's never filled with the obvious. Never assume that we know who Jesus wants sitting at his table. And never assume that you know who can and who cannot be saved at a table for Jesus. Because the one thing we don't have the power to do is see how Jesus is working with the human heart and the human story. That's why sometimes you'll talk to somebody and out of the blue, they say, I'm ready to give my life to Jesus. And you're like, what? How? 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 Because I've got divine x-ray and I can read the human heart. And as far as I was concerned, you're not ready. Man, it's way above your grace grade. Way! Everybody say, way! Way! Oh, yeah, from here. Everybody say, way! Way! Above your grace grade. For you to decide who you think is ready to serve Jesus Christ. Oh, well, he doesn't do this and she doesn't do that. Number 2, a table for Jesus is an open table. A table for Jesus is an open table. Oh, Lord have mercy. Give people a chance to get in through the doors of the church, young people. Just give them a chance to get in. Don't stand up at the door like a policeman. Oh, hold on. Yes, can I have a word with you, please? Yes. Can you tell me the things you believe? Yes, okay. Do you have any piercings? No? Okay. Can I see your lunch card, please? Can I see your diet? Yes. Okay. Do you have any other habits? I need to know that. You're good? Yeah, come in. Yes. The Lord is ready to receive you. You can sit at Jesus' table. You know, I'm not making light of standards. But standards ain't got nothing to do with salvation. Standards have nothing to do with salvation. Standards have to do with the way we just live within a community. That's why the Lord says, listen, you look on the outward appearance, I look on the heart. So let me look on the heart and you have patience with the outward appearance. Because you don't know what's going on in their life. A table for Jesus is an open table. Number 2, a table for Jesus remembers who used to sit there. That's what I love about Levi. Levi never forgot who used to sit at the table with him. We do that as Christians, especially those of us who are what I call oversaved. You oversaved. You see, an oversaved person is a person that looks with scorn at what she did, forgetting I used to sit with her. Sorry for keep on using you, but you're just there. I'm just going to pick on you because you're there. Because you're a beautiful child of God. So, she's an alcoholic. And I used to be an alcoholic with her. But Jesus saved me. And now I look like I never used to do what she used to do. Oh, those people who drink. Oh, those people who smoke. Oh, those people who cuss. Oh, those people oversaved. Everybody say, oversaved. Oversaved. Jesus wants us to remember the people we left behind. Some of us may never have even gone out into the world. For some of us, the only Coke we've ever done is Coca-Cola. Some of you used to just be so and you've left that. And now you look at the same people you used to do that with. Yeah. Because you become oversaved too. Oversaved people ain't just people who are just overly conservative. Oversaved people too can be people who are just overly progressive. Don't use the word liberal because they're not liberal. They're progressive, but overly progressive. And both of them are both on the sides of impatience and intolerance. A table for Jesus remembers who used to sit there. And lastly, a table for Jesus never apologizes but always defends who sits at the table. And that's hard for us. That's hard for us. it's hard for us because we want people to look right. Yeah, no, but what's Jesus gonna say? What's Jesus gonna say if they look like that? And what's Jesus gonna say if they talk like that? And what's Jesus gonna say if they have that problem and they come to church with it? But that's where they're supposed to be, isn't it? For me, on a Sabbath morning, the most beautiful smell I love to smell on a Sabbath morning when I hug a man, I love the smell of weed coming out of his pores. Nah, you're laughing, but I'm saying it seriously. Because you know you can smoke weed so much that sometimes they try to mask it, but they don't understand that it's in your system, so it will come through your pores. Same like an alcoholic. You may have put as many breath mints in you, but the alcohol is so deep in your system, when I hug you, I can smell it coming through your pores. But he brought it to church with him. And so I love it. I would rather you sit in the presence of God with that smell coming through your pores than sit in your home with it. Because once you're in the presence of Jesus, hey, once you hear about the power of Jesus, once you hear a testimony of the ability of Jesus to break chains and break addictions, once one of them old mothers lay their hands on your head and just pray over you, chains are broken. Chains are broken. And that's why Jesus never apologizes for anybody who comes and sits in his presence. Neither should we. Because let me tell you something, the world ain't going to care what we know until the world knows that we care. The world ain't interested in the things we have to say. Action speaks louder than words. Action speaks louder than words. Hot Milk, 1974. Action speaks louder than words. That's why Jesus had to come in flesh. That's why Jesus had to put on human flesh. That's why Jesus had to go to the table of Levi and say, follow me. That's why Jesus had to sit at his table and defend his right to be there and say, I didn't come to save the righteous. I came to save the unrighteous. I didn't come to save the found. I came to save the lost, because action speaks louder than words. That's why Jesus had to hang on a cross and say, forgive them, Father. They've lost their minds and they don't know what they're doing. Forgive them, Father. They don't even know they've run out of time. Because action speaks louder than words. And the world ain't going to care what we have to say as Christians until we go to where they are and say, follow me out of there. Until we sit down in the places where they hurt, amongst the people and their friends who they hurt with. Until we are not embarrassed and we are not ashamed to go and sit where they are, because they invite us into where they are. Because they are so encouraged by the life of Christ in us, and the love of Christ in us, and the power of Christ in us, and the grace of Christ in us, that they want us to sit where they are. Hey! And until we do that, the world ain't going to care what we have to say. Because if our actions ain't showing it first, our words ain't going to mean a thing. Could it be? Could it be that what Jesus is asking us to be are personal tables for him? Could it be that Jesus is asking us to be the table of forgiveness and thankfulness and openness and grace that people can come next to, and sitting where we are, they sit with him? Could it be that for a church that is looking for the next great, what's the next great methodology? That Jesus is saying, just open up your front room. Believe me, I'm making it as simple as that. Just open up your front room. Add an extra 2 more spaces on your team for a couple of more subs. Just go down the road and instead of doing your ministry of outreach here, go and do it over there. Could it be that's all Jesus is asking us to do? Could it be that it's that simple, but we're making it that hard? Follow me. That's what Jesus said. Follow me. Make a table for me. Father, thank you. Thank you that it's that simple. Forgive us for making it that hard. And now show us, Father, how we do that in our life. And as a group, and in our space. We pray. Amen. Amen.
Can we give another amen to Pastor Eddie?
Amen.
And can we all please be upstanding for our last song? Come to the altar. Are you hurting and broken within? Overwhelmed by the weight of your sins? Jesus is calling. Have you come to the end of yourself? Do you thirst for a drink from the well? Jesus is calling. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide.
Jesus Christ.
Thank you, Jesus.
Did you guys enjoy the service?
Amen.
Half of you guys are asleep. Did you guys enjoy the service?
Amen.
Alright guys, it's time for announcement. The cafe is open. What are they called? Motels are ready to go pick up and have some to drink. And thanks for coming, you guys. And Pastor Ed's books are available. If you guys want to know more about it, go see him.
Are we having food tomorrow night, Celine? Like we did tonight, we had tacos, but I didn't see many of you there.
Yeah. But yeah, come at 6:30. There might be something to eat. Yeah.
It doesn't hurt to be early.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, you guys stay blessed and have a very blessed night. Thank you guys.